Montana Territory, July 1873. The fire had eaten everything but the dirt beneath it. Cora Prescott's hands were black with soot, her fingernails torn, knuckles bleeding in places as she dug through the cold ashes of what had once been her family's cabin. Smoke still hung low in the air, clinging to her dark braid and the hem of her torn dress. Her knees pressed into the scorched earth, skirts soaked with melted snowmelt and grief. Her eyes were dry now. She had run out of tears the night before. She was looking for one thing, a doll, hand-stitched, stuffed with cotton and filled with the voice of her little sister. The girl had been 7. Her name was Ada. She had slept with that doll every night since their mother died. Cora had promised her she would get it back. The wind shifted, and with it came the faint crunch of boots behind her. She did not look up. A man lowered himself slowly beside her, silent, the way you might sit beside someone at a grave. He did not speak, just settled into the ash beside her, knees bent, arms resting on them. His hat shadowed his face, but she could feel him watching. Cora kept digging. The doll had been by the hearth. Ada had dropped it before she ran. Cora had carried her sister out coughing, barefoot, clutching at her nightgown. There had not been time to grab anything else. The fire had moved too fast. She reached deeper, and her fingers found something soft beneath a charred beam. Her breath caught. She pulled it free. The face was scorched, one button eye melted, but it was still the doll, still Ada's. Cora held it to her chest, gripping it tight, and her shoulders shook. The man beside her did not speak, did not touch her. He just sat there, solid, still like a mountain. After a long time, he said, "You her sister?" Cora nodded, still holding the doll. "I saw the smoke last night," he said. "Came down from Bitterroot. Was already too late." She finally looked at him. He was young, maybe 28, maybe older. Dusty shirt, tan coat, revolver slung low on his hip. His eyes were pale green, steady. His voice was low. Cora cleared her throat. "You a rancher?" "Cowboy," he said. "Name's Gideon Fletcher. I was headed to Bozeman." He hesitated. Saw the fire. Figured someone ought to check. Cora looked back at the blackened ruins. There were only 3 of us. Me, Ada, and my father. She swallowed hard. He did not make it out. Gideon's jaw tightened. "I am sorry. I got Ada to town. Doctor says she will live. Her lungs are burned some, but she is strong." He did not ask why she had come back here alone. Maybe he understood. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "In town for now, but the room costs more than I have. We did not have much saved." Her voice was flat. He was quiet again. Then he stood. "Come on. You should head back before dark." Cora looked up at him, the light behind his shoulders, the outline of his hand extended toward her. She took it. He pulled her up gently, like he knew she was tired down to her bones. They walked back to town together, the doll still clutched in her arms, the cowboy keeping pace beside her without a word. Gideon paid for her supper that night, left the coins on the counter without asking. "I do not need charity," she said as they stepped out of the saloon into the cooling air. "Not charity," he said simply. "Just kindness." She did not argue. Ada was sleeping in the doctor's back room, wrapped in quilts, her breathing shallow but steady. Cora sat with her for a while, stroking her forehead, the doll tucked beside her. When she came back out, Gideon was still waiting, leaning against the hitch rail, arms crossed. "You got anyone coming for you?" he asked. Cora shook her head. "Mother died 2 winters back. No other family. My father. He was all we had." He nodded once. "You ever work stock?" She blinked. "What?" "Cattle. Fence mending. Trail cooking. I am short a hand out at the ranch I work for." Owner just lost his wife. Needs someone to look after the house and the little ones. I could put in a word. Cora studied him. Why are you helping me? He scratched at his jaw. I reckon you do not owe me anything. But you came back to a burned-out cabin alone, for a doll. That says something. She looked down. It said she needed it. He nodded. Exactly. By the end of the week, Cora and Ada were riding out with him to the ranch. Gideon rode ahead, quiet, steady, never pushing. He did not ask Cora about the fire again. He did not ask about the scars on her arms or the way she flinched at loud noises. But he noticed. He noticed when Ada cried at night, and he brought her peppermint candy from town. He noticed when Cora's hands shook while cooking, and he wrapped her apron string without a word. He noticed everything, and he never made her feel small for any of it. Weeks passed. Cora took to the work fast. Mornings were filled with bread baking and laundry. Ada's laughter starting to return. Gideon worked long days, but she watched him from the porch sometimes, how he moved with the horses, how the other men respected him. One night, after the dishes were washed and Ada was asleep, she found him sitting out by the barn, whittling a piece of pine. She sat beside him, just like he had done for her. "What are you making?" she asked. He held it up. A little wooden horse, not quite finished. "Something for Ada. She likes her doll. But I thought maybe she would want something new, too." Cora looked at him. Really looked. "You have been good to her," she said softly. He met her eyes. "She is a good kid." She swallowed. "You have been good to me, too." He looked down. "You make it easy." The silence stretched between them, warm this time. Cora took a breath. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would want something in return." He turned to her fully then, his voice low. "I do not want anything you are not ready to give." She blinked, heart stuttering. "And if I am ready?" His eyes did not leave hers. "Then I will be right here." She reached out slowly and touched his hand. And he let her. It was not fast, but it was not slow either. It was right. By the time the leaves started turning gold, Ada was running through the fields again, and Cora was sleeping with her head on Gideon's shoulder on the porch swing. He kissed her one night beneath the cottonwoods, soft and sure, and she kissed him back like she had been waiting her whole life for it, because maybe she had. And he whispered against her skin, "I am yours if you want me." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I already do." The first snow came early that year. It dusted the ridgelines and softened the edges of the world, falling quiet over the ranch house and the cottonwoods behind it. Cora stood at the window with her hands wrapped around a tin cup, watching Ada trace shapes into the frost on the glass. The child's breath fogged the pain, her little fingers red but insistent. "You'll chill your skin, sweet girl," Cora murmured. Ada didn't answer, just smiled over her shoulder and kept drawing. A crooked horse, a sun with too many rays, a stick figure with two braids. Cora turned from the window and set the cup down. She'd been sewing by lamplight since dawn, mending a torn collar on one of Gideon's shirts. His scent still clung faintly to the fabric saddle soap and pine smoke. She folded the shirt carefully and placed it in the chest they shared now. Outside, hooves crunched over brittle snow. She stepped out onto the porch, tucking her shawl at her shoulders. Gideon swung off his horse, leading a second mare behind him by the reins. He looked up with his usual quiet steadiness and said, "She's gentle. I thought Ada might be ready." Cora descended the steps slowly, heart swelling. "You brought her a pony?" "I had her since spring. Broke her myself. Figured the girl might like something to call her own." Cora watched him unsaddle the mare, his hands practiced and gentle. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "I wanted to." Ada burst out the door, boots thudding. cheeks flushed with cold. Is she mine? Gideon crouched to meet her eye. She's yours if you're ready to care for her. That means brushing her down, feeding her oats, checking her hooves after every ride. I can, Ada swore, nodding furiously. I will. Cora crouched beside them. What's her name? Ada looked at the mare, then at Gideon. Can I name her? He nodded. She's yours now. The child thought a long moment. Junebug. Gideon smiled, just the corners of his mouth. That'll suit her. Cora felt something settle in her chest, warm and quiet, a kind of safety she had never known. That night, after Ada was tucked in and Junebug had been fed and blanketed, Cora found Gideon in the barn, brushing down his gelding. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but not from the cold. You keep surprising me, she said. He didn't look up. That's so? She stepped closer. The pony. You didn't ask me. I figured you'd say yes. I would've. Gideon paused, hand resting on the horse's withers. You ever think about what comes next? Cora tilted her head. What do you mean? I mean, this has been months now, and I ain't in the habit of drifting. She folded her arms tighter, breath catching a little. Neither am I. He turned to face her fully. Then maybe it's time we talked about it. She looked down at her boots, then back up. I never thought I'd have a say in what my life looked like, but I want to now. I want to choose. You already did, he said. When you stayed. Cora took a step forward. I want to do this right. So do I. They stood there in the dim barn light, the horses shifting quietly behind them. I never imagined a man would wait for me to be ready, she whispered. I wasn't waiting, he said. I was building something for when you were. She felt the tears come fast this time, but they didn't burn. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers between his. Then let's call it ours, she said. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. We already do. The wind howled outside, but inside, the barn was warm. And in that warmth, something new took root. Not fast, not loud, just steady, like them. The wedding was small. Just the family Gideon worked for, the ranch hands who stayed year-round, and the preacher who came up from Three Forks once a month. They held it under the cottonwoods behind the house, the trees bare but the ground swept clean. Snow clung to the fence rails in places, and a buckskin gelding watched quietly from the pasture beyond. Cora wore a dress she'd finished the night before, stitched from calico she'd traded baked goods for back in October. She hadn't had time to hem it properly, but she didn't care. Ada stood beside her, chin lifted. Her braids tied with ribbon Gideon had brought back from town without saying a word about it. The girl held the carved horse he'd given her, worn smooth now from being clutched in sleep. Gideon didn't wear anything new, just a clean shirt, his best coat, and the same steady look he'd had the day he found her in the ashes. When the preacher asked if she'd take him, she didn't hesitate. Afterward, there was bread, beans, and coffee brewed strong over a fire. One of the ranch hands picked at a fiddle, and Ada danced with her pigtails flying. Cora sat on the porch railing, her hand warm inside Gideon's. Every so often, he glanced at her like he still couldn't quite believe she was there. Later, when the sun had gone and the fire burned low, Gideon led her out past the barn where the snow hadn't yet drifted. He carried a lantern, and she followed the light until they reached a small, newly built cabin tucked back along the tree line. It was modest, one room, a stone hearth, a bed made up neat, and a braided rug she recognized from the storeroom. I thought you might want something that's yours, he said, setting the lantern on the sill. She stepped inside slowly, running her hand along the doorframe. You built this. Started in September. Figured you'd need time, and I'd need a roof ready if you said yes. She turned to him, eyes shining. You're not sleeping in the bunkhouse anymore? He shook his head. Not unless you throw me out. She smiled and stepped into him, her hands resting against his chest. You're not going anywhere. Snow tapped against the roof as the fire caught in the hearth. He stood behind her while she warmed her hands, his arms circling her waist. You missed the mountains yet? She asked. Not as much as I thought I would. She leaned back into him. Why? Because everything that matters is already here. The wind outside deepened, but inside the cabin, it was warm. He kissed the top of her head, and she turned in his arms and rose onto the balls of her feet to kiss him back. They didn't rush. They never had. When the firelight dimmed, they lay beneath the quilt she'd pieced together from scraps, his hand resting over hers, both of them quiet. In the morning, she woke before him. She stepped outside while the sky was still pale, pulling on the shawl he'd left folded at the foot of the bed. The air bit sharp, but it didn't bother her. The world was still, the kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. She walked the short path back to the main house, boots crunching over snow. Inside, Ada was already up, wrapped in a blanket, reading beside the stove. Cora kissed the top of her head, then ladled out oats and sat with her, their knees bumping beneath the table. You look different, Ada said around a mouthful. Cora raised a brow. How so? Happier. She paused, then smiled. I am. They spent the morning gathering eggs, splitting wood, and boiling laundry. Gideon returned later with a brace of grouse and a fresh-cut cedar branch he set beside the hearth in their new home. Figured we could hang your wedding dress on it when you're ready to put it away, he said. She touched the bark, fingers light. Or maybe I'll make Ada's next out of it. He studied her for a moment before saying, I like the sound of that. That night, they sat on the porch again, the stars high and cold above them. Gideon smoked his pipe, and Cora leaned against his side. Ada curled up between them with her head on her sister's lap. You ever miss the girl you were before? He asked, voice low. No, Cora said. She didn't know what was coming. But I'm proud of who she became. He nodded, then reached across Ada to take her hand. I am too. The spring thaw came slower than the year before, clinging to the ridges and creeks like it wasn't ready to let go. Snow melted in fits, turning the pastures to thick mud and loosening the fence posts one by one. Gideon spent most of his days hauling new rails and tamping them in, shoulders bowed under the weight of it but never complaining. Cora watched from the kitchen window, Ada beside her peeling potatoes with more care than speed. You think he ever gets tired? Ada asked, her tongue tucked at the corner of her mouth. Cora wiped her hands on her apron and leaned into the sill. I think he works until the work's done. That's not the same thing. Outside, Gideon straightened and let his arms hang loose at his sides. The sleeves of his shirt rolled high, his face streaked with dust. He caught Cora's eye through the glass and tipped his head once, then went back to digging. That night, after Ada had gone to sleep with her arm tucked around her mare's brush, she'd taken to sleeping with it like a charm. Cora found Gideon sitting at the table with a pencil in hand and an old ledger open before him. You keeping accounts? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. He shook his head, trying to figure how many head will be trailing east come June. The Caldwells want to push farther this season, maybe as far as Dickinson. She crossed to him and ran her hand across his shoulders, careful of the sore spots she knew by now. That's a long ride, she said. Near 2 months, if the river crossings go smooth. He looked up at her. I was thinking I'd go, but I'd rather not leave you and Ada here alone. She pulled out a chair and sat beside him, her expression steady. Do you want to go? I don't mind the trail, but I've never had anything to come back to before. His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. Now I do. Cora traced the edge of the table with her fingertip. We'd be all right. You know that. He nodded, but didn't speak. She reached for his hand. You've given us more than safety, Gideon. You've given us a place to belong. That doesn't disappear just because you ride out for a season. He turned his hand under hers, clasping it. I don't like the thought of you doing everything alone. I won't be. Ada helps plenty. And I'm not made of glass. He looked at her then, really looked the way he had in the early days when he was still learning the shape of her grief. Now he was learning the shape of her strength. I'll go, he said, but only if you say it. She smiled, slow and sure. Go. Just come back to us. He kissed her then, not with urgency, but with certainty. A man who knew exactly what he was returning to. Come May. Ada gave him a wildflower tucked into his saddlebag, and Cora packed him bread wrapped in cloth still warm from the oven. He rode out with the other men in the gray light of morning, his hat pulled low and his rifle slung across his back. He didn't look back until the bend in the trail, where he raised his hand once, and then kept on. The days turned long after that. Cora mended tack and planted herbs in the soft earth near the porch. She taught Ada her letters with a slate and a broken bit of chalk, and at night, they read by lamplight from the worn book of Psalms that had belonged to their mother. One afternoon, Ada came in with her cheeks red and her shirt torn at the hem. She held something behind her back. What happened? Cora asked, kneeling. Ada grinned. Found a fox with a limp. I was real quiet, like you said. I didn't scare him. Cora brushed the child's hair off her forehead. You didn't try to catch him, did you? No, ma'am. Just watched. He was digging under the old stump by the creek. Cora stood slowly. You've got a good eye, Ada, but that's wild land. You'll stay close to the house now, until the rains pass. Ada nodded, then pulled her hand from behind her back. She held out a feather, long and soft gray-blue at the tip. For Gideon, she said. You can send it in a letter. Cora took it gently. I will. That night, she sat at the table and wrote careful words in her practiced hand. Not one to waste paper. She used the margin to sketch a rough drawing of Ada riding Junebug, the feather tucked behind her ear. She sealed the letter and set it aside for the next rider heading east. Weeks passed. The fields grew high with grass again, and the creek ran full. Birds nested beneath the eaves, and Cora hung fresh linens on the line with Ada handing her clothespins, one by one. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun settled behind the hills and the wind shifted the scent of lilac through the yard, hoofbeats sounded from the trail. Not a gallop, not a rush, just a steady, familiar rhythm. Cora stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on her skirt. Gideon rode in with dust on his coat and his face sun-darkened, but his eyes were the same. He dismounted, tied his horse, and met her halfway with no words. She reached up and touched his jaw, rough with days of travel. You're late, she said, voice soft. He smiled with his eyes. I came back. She nodded. That's what matters. Ada came barreling from the barn, Junebug behind her, and flung her arms around his waist. He caught her with one arm, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. You seen the feather I sent? She asked. It's in my hatband, he said. Kept it there every mile. That night, after supper and a long bath drawn from the rain barrel, Gideon sat in his chair by the hearth, boots off, Ada curled up on the rug nearby. Cora sat across from him, her legs tucked under her. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. What's that? She asked. He handed it to her. Inside was a length of ribbon, pale green. Saw it in Dickinson. Thought it might go well with your Sunday dress. Cora held it gently, the fabric soft between her fingers. I didn't expect anything, she said. I know, he replied. That's why I brought it. She rose, walked to him, and sat on the arm of his chair. He rested his head against her side, his hand on her knee. And in the quiet of their home, with the fire burning low and the windows open to the warm night, everything felt just as it should. By midsummer, the earth had dried enough for planting late carrots and pulling the last of the spring onions. Cora's hands were calloused from turning soil, and her arms bore the faint golden tone of someone who spent her days beneath the open sky. She moved easily now between kitchen and pasture, between Ada's questions and Gideon's quiet glances, which had grown more frequent and full of something deeper than comfort, something settled. The small cabin they'd made their home had changed in ways she hadn't noticed all at once. A second chair had been added near the hearth. 2 mugs hung on the same peg. A shelf Gideon built now held Ada's books, and a carved wooden box sat beneath the bed, holding Cora's mother's psalter, a spool of thread, and the green ribbon Gideon had given her. One evening, she was sewing beside the window while Ada gathered kindling. Gideon came in, wiping the dust from his cuffs, and crouched beside her without a word. He rested his chin on her knee, and she set her stitching aside. "You're quiet tonight," she said. He nodded, eyes on the floorboards. "Been thinking." She waited. "I put in for a small parcel, 40 acres west of the Cottonwood line." Cora's breath caught. "You did that without telling me?" "I wanted it to be mine before I offered it to you." She touched his jaw. "You already gave me everything worth having." He looked up then, and she saw it, the hesitation that came from having never known what it was to plan for someone else. "I want to build something that's ours from the first post to the last hinge," he said. "Not just a roof over us, but land we raise together. A place Ada can grow into." Cora folded her fingers around his. "When do we start?" That autumn they began clearing the new land. Gideon borrowed a team from the Caldwell Ranch, and Cora took up the ledger, recording lumber costs and mapping out where the new house would sit. Ada helped drive stakes into the ground and passed nails to Gideon with solemn care. The frame went up slowly, board by board. Gideon taught Cora how to square a corner and measure for joinery. She learned to plane a beam smooth and judge the weight of a door before it was hung. At night they fell asleep bone-tired, but with the kind of ache that meant something was being built, not lost. Cora planted a row of lilac cuttings along the edge of the house, dug from the ones blooming behind the cabin. She'd wrapped the roots in damp cloth and carried them herself, one by one. Gideon watched her from the porch, arms crossed. "You always plant things in pairs," he said. She straightened. "I don't like anything to grow alone." The house was finished before the first frost. It had 2 rooms, a stone chimney Cora insisted on helping lay, and windows wide enough to let in the morning light. Gideon carved their initials into the underside of the porch rail, low and small where only she would see. They moved in before snowfall, bringing with them what little they owned, and all they had made together. That winter, Ada turned 9. Cora made a cake from dried apples and flour she traded for in town, and Gideon carved her a spinning top shaped like a bird in flight. They ate by lanternlight, and Ada fell asleep on the braided rug in front of the fire, her cheeks flushed and her arms curled around Junebug's old bridle strap. Later, in bed, Cora lay curled beside Gideon, his palms spread over the curve of her belly. "She kicked today," she whispered. He smiled into her hair. "She's early. She's strong. Like her mother." They lay in silence after that, the fire popping low in the hearth. Outside, the wind swept across the roof, but inside, the world was still. The baby came in early spring, born in the quiet hours before dawn. Cora labored slowly, steadily, Gideon beside her every moment, his hand never leaving hers. Ada waited outside the door, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, holding a tin cup of warm water like it was gold. When the child was placed in Cora's arms, red-faced and squalling, She looked up at Gideon and saw tears in his eyes for the first time. "She's here," she whispered. He knelt beside the bed, kissed her forehead, and then the soft crown of their daughter's head. "You did it. We did." They named her Leah, after Cora's grandmother, and wrapped her in the shawl Cora had worn the night Gideon returned from the trail. The land turned green again. The lilacs bloomed. Ada took to her role as older sister with fierce devotion, reading aloud from the Psalter while Leah slept, and brushing Junebug with quiet purpose in the early light. Cora taught her how to knead bread and how to spot the first sign of blight on a tomato vine. Gideon taught her how to ride bareback and how to gently break a skittish colt. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled of warm earth and cut hay, Cora stood in the doorway watching Gideon rock Leah in the chair he'd built with his own hands. Ada was sorting dried beans at the table, humming something tuneless but soft. Cora stepped into the room and leaned against the frame. Gideon looked up. "Think she'll be wild?" he asked, nodding to the baby. "She'll be steady," Cora said, walking to him. "Like her father." He smiled, kissed her wrist where her pulse beat warm beneath the skin. They sat together, the three of them, while the day slipped quietly into dusk. And when the stars rose, they were not alone, not scared, not uncertain. They were home, always.